My mom bought a car for my aunt with the money I gave her for the house rent, but now she's calling me for more because my aunt has abandoned her. At 28 years old, I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would cut off his mother. After all, she raised me as a single mother, worked hard all her life to give me everything she could, and I always felt like I owed her for the sacrifices she made. But things reached a breaking point, and I had to make a decision for my own well-being. Let me back up a bit. I've been living independently for a decade. My mom raised me alone after my dad left us when I was just 2 years old. We never had much, but I never felt like we were missing anything, mainly because my mom worked tirelessly to make sure we had a decent life. I always admired her for that. We lived in a small apartment, cozy, yes, but cramped. I remember my mom always dreamed of living in a house with a yard and a garden. We would walk past houses in the neighborhood, and she would say, "One day I'll have my own place with a garden where I can plant flowers, grow some organic vegetables, and enjoy the sun in the winter." Oh, what a blessing it would be to read and relax on the lawn with the cool summer breeze. But of course, that never happened. We couldn't afford to buy a house. No matter how hard she worked, there was never enough money to save for one. I know it might sound funny to some of you, but there are people like us who could only dream of living in a spacious house. Very early in life, I realized the importance of money. I started working when I was just 13, but I made sure to finish college. I got a decent job in marketing after that. At first, it was an entry-level job, but over time, I moved up and got a couple of promotions. I also did some side jobs that brought in a little extra money. When I started earning well, I felt obligated to help my mom. She was still working, but she didn't make much, and I knew she had given everything to make sure I could go to college and have a real head start in life. So I started sending her some money every month. At first, it wasn't much, just enough to help her with groceries and utilities. But over time, as my income increased, I started sending her more. It felt good to be able to do something for her, given everything she had done for me. It was never a question in my mind. She had sacrificed for me, and I wanted to return the favor. About 2 years ago, I got a big promotion and a salary increase. I was finally in a position to really help my mom in a meaningful way. The memory of our evening walks and my mother's sincere wishes to live in a house were always fresh in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and subconsciously, it became my dream too. But I knew that, while buying a house wasn't possible just yet, we could rent one. When I told her about my plan to rent a house, she was excited. She immediately started looking for a house to rent. I asked her to look in a senior community since those places are safer for older women living alone. Now, I live about 7 hours away from her, so I can't visit often, maybe once or twice a year, so I wanted her to find a place in a safe area. The houses that suited her best were available with a 5-year lease, but the rent was paid up front annually. The entire block was for older couples or single people, aged between 50, 60, and 70, whose children lived far away or had no children. She sent me pictures of the houses she liked, houses with beautiful gardens, some with front porches, others with backyards. I told her to choose one, and I would cover the rent. I sent her the money for the lease, thinking I had made her dream come true. I didn't tell her this, but I was planning to buy her a house within the next 5 years. That was my goal. But now, I don't think that's going to happen. After she got the money, she went silent. When I asked her about it, she said the landlord was fixing some things, and it would take a month to move in. Christmas was approaching, and I messaged her saying I'd visit for Christmas and asked if the house would be ready by then. To my surprise, she said she wouldn't be home for Christmas. Instead, she was going on vacation to Florida with my aunt. It was strange because Christmas was a big deal for my mom. We had traditions, and she had never missed a celebration at home. It felt weird, not that I visit her every year for Christmas, but my mom always organizes something for her friends and family. After the Florida announcement, I started having my doubts. I asked her to send me the lease contract, and she did. I asked about the moving plans, and she always had some excuse. One day she told me she had already moved in. I don't talk to my mom every day, maybe once or twice a week. I rarely have time to video call her, with work and everything. But when she said she had moved, I was excited to see the house. I asked for a video tour. She said she'd call me over the weekend, but that never happened. When I tried to video call her, she declined and then texted saying she was busy, out, or at work. Sometimes she would call me, but always during my work hours, and I couldn't answer. One Thursday afternoon, she called, and since I was free, I picked up. She immediately hung up and disconnected. Christmas came and went, and there were no photos of her trip to Florida. New Year's passed, and there were no photos of her in the new house. Something in my intuition told me things didn't add up. I was also busy with my girlfriend during the holidays, so after everything passed, one weekend, I pushed her so much that I told her I wanted to see the house right then. Finally, she broke down. She's not the kind of person who cries easily, but this time, through tears, She confessed that she hadn't rented the house. Instead, she had used the money to buy a car, not for herself, but for my aunt. I didn't understand why she had bought a car for my aunt. I exploded. "You bought a car for Aunt?" She sobbed. "Yes, your aunt desperately needed a car. Her old car broke down months ago and she couldn't visit me. Using public transportation isn't a viable option for her. What else could I do? She needed the car more than I needed a house. A car is a necessity." I was stunned to hear that my aunt needed a car more than my mom needed a house. One thing that has always been true is that my mom has been very close to my aunt. They're inseparable. My aunt is the youngest, and my mom treats her like a child. Sometimes it gets toxic when my mom goes overboard with affection, which isn't reciprocated by my aunt. Apparently, my aunt's old car had broken down, and since she couldn't visit my mom as often, my mom decided to help her by buying her a new one. At first, I thought she had just loaned her the money or co-signed for a loan or something. That would have been bad enough if my aunt had repaid the money. But when she explained that she had outright gifted her a car with the money I had sent for the house lease, I completely lost control. I lost my composure and yelled, "How could you do that? That money was for your house, for your dream." Her response was equally baffling. "Your aunt has done so much for me over the years. When her car broke down, she couldn't visit me and I missed her." I couldn't understand it. My aunt was perfectly capable of buying her own car. She has 2 children who could easily have bought her a new car. Why did my mom feel the need to do this? I asked why my aunt couldn't just buy her own car, and she didn't have a clear answer. It was obvious that she felt some kind of strange obligation towards her sister, but it didn't make sense to me. I asked, "What happened to the lease agreement you sent me? Did you cancel it?" She made up some excuse until I pressed her enough. She finally admitted that it was a fake document that she had created using an online tool. She asked a guy at work for help. So, not only had she given away my hard-earned money to someone who didn't need it, but she also forged a legal document to deceive me. I yelled at her about how I had saved that money by sacrificing small things that made me happy, and how I always took care of her, sending her money for her monthly expenses instead of saving for my own future. She didn't take it well. In fact, she called me resentful, controlling, and selfish, saying, "You only think about yourself. Your aunt has done so much for me. Is this how you repay her?" She said I was punishing her for being generous. That statement really hurt because it wasn't about generosity at all. It was about how she made a poor decision with the money I gave her. I wasn't wealthy by any means. I worked hard, often holding 2 jobs as I took freelance work from time to time, and even though I was doing well, I still had to pay my rent, bills, and fulfill my responsibilities. It wasn't like I was swimming in money, but it seemed that no matter how much I tried to explain my point of view, she wasn't willing to see it from my perspective. Instead of apologizing, she said, "Who asked you to send the money? I lived within my means. Did I beg you for that money? Don't act like you did me a favor. I raised you and made you capable of earning what you're making now, so don't raise your voice at me." I said, "Fine. If you don't need my money since you never asked for it, then I won't send you any more." She responded, "Fine," and hung up. I still can't understand what happened. How could my mom be so foolish? Do you think her actions were justified, or is my anger as misplaced as my mom thinks? Update 1. I'm sorry I haven't updated in so long. In fact, I was out of contact with my mom for over a year after that fight. I stopped sending her the monthly allowance, and we both held firm in our positions, not taking the first step. Then, 2 months ago, she called me out of the blue, sounding different. It wasn't her typical combative tone. She apologized and said it had been foolish to give my aunt a new car. It was a big surprise because my mom rarely apologizes or admits her mistakes. She's a stubborn woman. She said she wanted to fix things and work on our relationship. Of course, I had my doubts, but I agreed to listen to her. I asked what had made her change her mind. That's when she told me about her fallout with my aunt. Apparently, things hadn't been going well between them. Mom felt that my aunt wasn't returning her love. About a month before that call, my mom had fallen and fractured her ankle, and she needed help getting around for a week or more. Naturally, she called my aunt for help. Mom expected my aunt to come to her rescue quickly, as she would have done if the situation had been reversed. But sadly, my aunt refused, saying she was too busy. That was a blow to my mom. It was the first sign. Not only did my aunt refuse to help, but she didn't even visit. If something like that had happened to my aunt, my mom would never have left her alone. That was the breaking point. However, their relationship had already been strained for a while. My mom revealed that my aunt had been turning her back on her ever since she stopped paying for her bills. I was surprised to learn that my mom used to pay for everything when they went out, meals, movies, or any fun activity. Even on their girls' days at the salon or the game room, it was always my mom who paid, and my aunt didn't seem to mind. However, after I cut my mom off financially, she had to start controlling her spending. One day, she asked my aunt to pay her share, and my aunt didn't like that at all. From there, she started distancing herself. She canceled their plans, something that had never happened before, and her visits drastically decreased. Sometimes, she even canceled, without giving any reason. It was like my mom had received a harsh reality check. She finally saw how one-sided her relationship with my aunt had been. My aunt kept taking and taking without giving much in return, and now that the money had run out, she had no interest in sticking around. It was hard for my mom to accept this because she loved my aunt selflessly and didn't get anything back. I won't say I was completely surprised because deep down, I had always sensed that my aunt wasn't as emotionally invested in their bond as my mom was. By the way, all these conversations didn't happen all at once. At first, I resisted listening to her and only responded in anger or ignored her calls. But eventually, as we talked, all of this came to light. Mom admitted that she had been a fool for allowing my aunt to take advantage of her for so long. She asked if we could work on our relationship and maybe start over. I cautiously agreed. I love her, and I didn't want things between us to remain broken forever. Things were going well for a while. My mom and I talked more, and it seemed like she had learned her lesson. But then about 3 weeks ago, she shyly said, "Now that we're back to how we used to be, would you resume sending me the monthly allowance you used to give me?" I was stunned. I couldn't help but feel like this was all just about money. She wanted to work on our relationship just to reopen the financial help channel. I told her no, that I had other commitments now. I'm planning to get married in the next 2 years and also buy a house with my boyfriend, so I can't afford to send her extra money. She didn't say anything at the time. She just went quiet and hung up, saying she had something to do. But she didn't give up on her demands. At first, she started emotionally manipulating me, reminding me of how she worked 2 jobs, often skipping lunch, so I could have school supplies and nice clothes. I understood her pain and guilt, but this wasn't about the past. I wasn't an ungrateful daughter. I had been supporting her for years, willingly and without hesitation. But now, I have my own responsibilities to manage. I told her, "Why do you need extra money now? You didn't even use my money for yourself, you used it to pay my aunt's bills. Now that you've cut ties with her, or rather, she's cut ties with you, you no longer need that much money. What you earn is enough for you, right? You've managed for a year, haven't you?" Then she took the passive-aggressive route, calling me ungrateful and reminding me of all the sacrifices she made for me when I was a child. I told her, "Say what you want, do what you want, I'm not giving in. I'm not going to put myself in that position again. I've done enough. And if you can't manage your own finances by now, that's not my responsibility." Guys, honestly, dealing with my mom is becoming stressful for me. Every time I talk to her, I feel like I'm walking into a minefield. She makes passive-aggressive comments about how hard things are for her now, how she can't do the things she used to do without my financial help. Sometimes, she directly asks me for money, and when I say no, the emotional manipulation begins again. I tell her, "If you're in a tough spot, why don't you ask my aunt to pay you back the money you spent on her car?" That sounded so strange to my mom. She said, "How could I ask her for that money? It was my gift to her." To which I responded, "You mean my gift because you used my money?" Her logic makes no sense to me. And now, in her twisted world, I seem to be the bad one. I want to cut her off. I even avoid her calls most of the time, but then she starts crying, saying I'm her only family and that she devoted her whole life to raising me. I hate that it's come to this, but I don't know what else to do. How do I cut her off knowing she has no one else? Update 2. Well, some of you commented on why I was so reluctant to cut off contact with my mom this time when I had already done it before. So guys, things were different the last time. My mom didn't contact me for over a year, but this time, she was calling and messaging me persistently, even if I ignored her for days. Also, last time, I knew my aunt was there to support her if anything happened. But now I know my aunt is useless, and it's hard for me to leave my mom on her own. Anyway, there's a new development in the situation. Let me catch you up. As I mentioned earlier, my mom kept insisting I resume the monthly allowance I used to send her, but I stood firm in my decision. I had to. I wasn't going to be a doormat. And I wasn't going to keep sending money into a black hole where it was only used to benefit my aunt. I told her that I couldn't help her financially after learning the truth about how she had wasted my money on my aunt. She didn't like that answer, and things got tense between us again. She even threatened to cut me out of her life, which felt like a low blow after everything I had done for her. I was the one who had put up with her issues, but when she threatened me, it was like, "Let's do it. Let's cut each other off. I don't want to continue this either. It seems like you only need me for money." Things got pretty ugly, and we hung up. She stopped calling me, and I didn't bother checking in on her either. But the real surprise came after a while when I saw a post on her social media. She was still hanging out with my aunt, despite all the drama that had supposedly gone down between them. At that moment, I knew for sure I had made the right decision, Now I don't know if my mom went back to paying for my aunt's expenses or how their relationship was restored. Sometimes I even wonder if my mom's story about her fight with my aunt was even true or if she made it up to gain my sympathy. But one thing is clear, my mom has a complicated relationship with her sister, and I wasn't going to let myself be dragged into that mess again. I still love my mom, and I'm open to having a relationship with her, but when it comes to money, there's not much I can do. I'm not her at the moment, and I certainly won't be funding her enabling behavior with my aunt anymore. If she wants a genuine mother-daughter relationship, without money being involved, I'm here. Sometimes, the hardest thing you can do is say no, but it's also the healthiest. Update 3. I had my doubts about whether my mom had really cut ties with my aunt or not, and I didn't want to call my aunt directly to ask. So I spoke with one of my cousins to get some clarity. I asked if he knew whether my mom and aunt had been fighting or distant for a while, and unsurprisingly, he said no. At least as far as he knew, they were still on good terms. My cousin doesn't live with my aunt, but from what he knew, there hadn't been any kind of falling out between them. This left me confused because the whole story my mom had told me about how my aunt hadn't helped her when she broke her ankle and how lonely she was seemed to be false. If there was no falling out, then what was the money really for? While I was talking to my cousin, I realized something. If my mom had lied about the falling out with my aunt, and she had done things like this in the past, she might have also lied about the car she supposedly bought. So filled with doubts, I asked my cousin directly. He told me that as far as he knew, my aunt hadn't bought a new car, and her old car was still running fine. This left me with even more questions because not only was the falling out fake, but the money I sent wasn't used to buy a car like my mom had told me. Now, I have no idea what the money was really used for. All of this feels so strange to me, even coming from my mom, who has already done questionable things before, but this is different. I can't help but feel more betrayed than ever. The whole story she told me to justify needing the money seems like a complete lie. Now I'm wondering what her real intention is behind continuously asking for financial help. What does she really need the money for? Is she in some financial trouble she hasn't told me about, or is she irresponsibly spending it on something else? All of this makes me feel like I can't trust her at all. Update 4. I won't deny that curiosity was eating me up. I needed to know what my mother had spent the money on, so I did something I didn't think I would. I spoke to her. I decided to call her to confront her once and for all and demand that she tell me what she had used my money for. And if she hadn't given it to my aunt and still had it, that she return it to me. A few days ago, I called her. Honestly, I didn't expect her to pick up because the last time we talked, we didn't end the conversation on good terms, but surprisingly, she answered rather quickly. As soon as she did, she asked if I had called because I had reconsidered, as she was willing to forget everything we said to each other. I assumed what she really meant was that I had reconsidered giving her more money, and that she was convinced I was calling to finally become her personal ATM. From the start of the conversation, I made it very clear that I was not calling to give her more money. At that moment her tone changed, and she asked, in a rather annoyed way, what I was calling for then. I told her directly that I knew everything, that she hadn't had a fight with my aunt, and that she also hadn't used the money to buy her a car. At first, she kept insisting that it was true, that I couldn't know the truth because I wasn't there, but I explained that I had spoken to my cousin, and he had told me what was really going on. She immediately called him a liar, claiming that he was deceiving me. I asked why my cousin would lie. What would he gain from it? That's when my mom, without any more valid excuses, finally confessed, though in an indirect way. She said she didn't want to rent that house because she thought it was an unnecessary expense, and that I had pressured her into doing it. According to her, she had decided to keep the money to have more security in her life. That so-called confession seemed extremely strange to me. If she had told me from the beginning that she preferred to save the money instead of spending it on the house, I wouldn't have had any problem with that. However, I didn't believe that version of the story because my mother has a long history of making up excuses. Her explanation didn't sound sincere to me, so I went one step further and told her that if she had really saved the money, then she could return it to me since she hadn't used it for the purpose I gave it to her for. That's when she started making excuses again. She said she couldn't return it because it was a gift and continued with a bunch of vague justifications. After a while of this conversation, she finally admitted that she had spent the money. The real confession was even more disappointing. She hadn't used the money on my aunt, as she had said before, but on herself. My mother had started buying things that she said she always wanted but could never afford. She bought nice things that, in my opinion, she didn't need at all. Essentially, she spent the money on superficial luxuries. Worst of all, besides spending my money, she had also used a credit card and now had debts to pay off. That apparently was the real reason she needed me to send her more money. At that moment, even though I could have kept demanding proof of her purchases or asked her to show me her expenses, her history of lying made me feel like it wasn't worth pushing further. She already had enough experience creating excuses, and if she provided proof, it would probably be fake. Regardless of whether what she said was true or not, what became absolutely clear was that my mother had proven to be completely irresponsible and manipulative, not only with money but emotionally as well. The disappointment was so great that I decided I couldn't continue this relationship under those terms. I had lost trust, and it was becoming more and more obvious that no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough for her. There would always be an excuse to ask for more. I calmly told her that I couldn't send her any more money and wished her well in paying off her debts, but that my responsibility toward her was over. After that, I ended the call and blocked her number. It was a hard decision because she's my mother, but at the same time, I know nothing good would have come from continuing to speak with her. I regret not having a 100% concrete answer about what exactly she spent all the money on, but I think at this point, it doesn't even matter anymore. If it had really been something good or important, she would have confessed it from the beginning instead of making up so many lies. This experience has taught me that sometimes it's healthier to close a door and move on, even if it's painful.